Welcome to the McElhaney Report. I'm Bill McElhaney. Each show we cover a crucial issue of the day, but always from a viewpoint or perspective rarely, if ever, aired by the mass media. We hope you'll find it interesting. This is perhaps the most important interview we've ever conducted. Since 1989, we've been told constantly by the mass media and the government about the so-called death of communism and the collapse of the Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellite nations. We are told that the new Russian rulers are democratic and opening up to political and economic freedom. The Bush and Clinton administrations have proposed even greater aid from U.S. taxpayers to the rulers of what is called the new Russia and the new Eastern European states. They tell us that we must aid and be partners with these rulers and join with them in a new world order. Our guest today can refute this conventional wisdom. He is one of two outstanding experts in the free world on this subject. The other expert, Anatoly Golitsyn, the source of this information, has been living in the United States in hiding under an assumed identity since 1960 to protect himself from murder by the Soviet KGB. Our guest today is editor of the London-based periodical Soviet Analyst and editor of Golitsyn's second book, just published in the spring of 1995, The Perestroika Deception. I want to welcome Christopher Story to the McElhaney Report.
Delighted to be here.
Very happy to have you, sir. For our listeners who are unfamiliar with this subject, we must start at the beginning. Anatoly Golitsyn, this is one of maybe one or two existing public photographs of him, probably taken 30 years ago. Who is Anatoly Golitsyn, and what did he reveal when he defected from the Soviet KGB in 1960?
Golitsyn is the most important defector ever to have reached the West. He came out actually in 1961. He fled to Finland in 1961 with his family, and he revealed the existence of a long-range strategy of deception based on Leninist principles. And his importance is that all defectors who've come since him appear to have been engaged in an attempt to refute what he says. So we look to Golitsyn as the source of proper insights into what the communists are really up to.
And he predicted, did he not, that the KGB would send false defectors deliberately to discredit him?
That's correct, and this happened almost immediately afterwards. Within 6 months, several defectors,
now,
both from the KGB and from the military intelligence.
In addition to identifying Soviet moles in European and in the European intelligence system, British intelligence system, French, he provided this whole new understanding of Soviet disinformation strategy. There was one man in the CIA who listened to him seriously. That was James Angleton. Tell us about Angleton.
James Jesus Angleton was a very remarkable counterintelligence expert, and he debriefed Golitsyn, and he became absolutely convinced that Golitsyn was telling the truth. This is clear from internal evidence, but Angleton became aware through Golitsyn of the significance of what the Soviets were really up to. Mm-hmm. Basically, what Golitsyn taught and revealed was that all Soviet governments are Leninist governments. They're driven by the deception strategy perfected by Lenin, which is aimed at achieving a long-range strategy, namely control of the whole world.
And part of this strategy, as really put into a codified plan by 1959, dealt with creating the impression that liberalization or destabilization, decentralization was occurring in the communist states as a way of lulling the West into putting down its defenses.
Yeah. What happened was that, according to Golitsyn, is that after the death of Stalin, the communists realized, in general, that the method of control that they'd been adopting, namely brutal repression, was an inefficient method of achieving control over populations, and that it was more efficient to seek to achieve control through infiltration and deception, and through the control of the minds of the target. And so the party instructed Alexander Shelepin, who was the head of the KGB, in 1958 to develop a plan for the use of the total resources of the revolution. And the KGB and the GRU, military intelligence, were instructed to become the instruments of the mobilization of the resources of the revolution. So between 1959 and 1961, Shelepin developed, perfected, and agreed with the party the full outline of this deception plan. And the deception plan is basically a means of projecting communism into the whole of the rest of the world. And they do it through deception, and we can examine how this is done as we go on.
Well, one of the features of the plan, obviously, was to give the impression that the international communist movement was breaking up, that there were splits, divisions, dissent, that there was a rift between Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union, there was a rift between Red China and the Soviet Union. All of these things were examples of this disinformation strategy. And one of the principal goals of it would be that the West would feel more secure and put down its guard.
Yes. Lenin's methodology involves the use of the dialectic. Now, the Western mind, which is a civilized, developed mind, does not understand dialectical deception, which is basically a Mongol concept. And the fake Russia-China split is a good example. By creating the false impression that there was a split, which incidentally they've continued ever since, because now we have communist China and supposedly non-communist Russia, so the illusion of the split continues.
That's right.
The West was lulled into believing that if it supported China, it would be taking precautionary action against Russia.
Yes.
In fact, what's happening, and is continuing, they are both working together, and their intentions ultimately are hostile. They are aggressively oriented towards the West.
Yes, and another consequence of staging, deliberately staging, phony encouragement of, or setting up, let's say, setting up phony, the KGB setting up phony dissident movements within communist countries, and supposedly, or in a theatrical way, presenting what appears to be liberalization or some lessening of tight control. That also has the effect of lulling the underground, the genuine underground opposition to communism in these countries out in the open, giving them the false hope that they can speak out, and then further identifying them and destroying them.
Well, this goes back actually to Tsarist days. In fact, the Tsarist secret police were adept at this. But Stalin's henchman, the founder of the Cheka, Dzerzhinsky, was particularly skilled at using what we call false opposition. And in fact, this was the main thrust of Lenin's strategy in the 1920s. When Lenin launched into the West what is known as the Trust, he allowed the emigration of a large number of emigres, and in their number were many controlled communist members of the Cheka. And he introduced this false controlled opposition to Western intelligence. And as a result, the perception of by Western intelligence of what was really happening was distorted. Now, this principle has been applied since 1961, and it came to its fruition under Gorbachev. Gorbachev's Perestroika, which means restructuring, is in fact the restructuring not of Soviet society, although that was done for, there was a certain amount of reform and restructuring to give it credibility.
Superficial.
Superficial. It is essentially the restructuring of the Western mind, the control of the Western mind. That is what it means. Stalin used the word perestroika, and it meant, in Stalin's vocabulary, it meant the reshoeing of a horse. The West misunderstood Perestroika, the meaning of Perestroika, thinking that it meant reform of the communist movement.
And this is
In
because,
fact, it's a deception.
yes, and this is because everything that we've witnessed since 1989 has been part of this grand disinformation strategy, which Golitsyn revealed in his 1984 book, New Lies for Old, had been prepared by 1959.